It started like every other ridiculous encounter I'd had with HOA Karen. I had just parked in my driveway after running errands when I noticed her standing at the edge of my property, arms crossed, wearing her usual smug expression. "That car is in violation of HOA regulations," she snapped, before I even had a chance to grab my bags from the back seat. I sighed. "What now, Karen?" She strutted closer, pointing an accusatory finger at the vehicle. "We have very clear rules about what kind of vehicles are permitted to be parked in driveways overnight. That thing? Absolutely unacceptable. It's a commercial vehicle, and our bylaws explicitly prohibit those." I frowned, glancing at the car. It was a nondescript black sedan, unassuming in every way. No logos, no signs, nothing that screamed commercial. "Karen, that's not a commercial vehicle," I said, already feeling the familiar frustration creeping in. She scoffed, pulling a laminated booklet from her tote bag because, of course, Karen carried around a printed copy of the HOA rules like a sacred text. Vehicles used for business purposes are subject to immediate removal. I've already reported it to the board. If it's not moved within the next hour, I'll be calling a tow truck. I fought the urge to laugh. You can't just tow someone's car because you think it's a commercial vehicle. Karen's eyes sparkled with petty delight. "Oh, but I can. In fact, I already did. The tow truck is on its way." My blood began to boil. Karen had pulled some ridiculous stunts before, but this was next-level insanity. "You didn't even give me time to move it," I argued. "The rules are the rules," she interrupted, folding her arms. "If you read the guidelines, you'd know this isn't up for debate. The board agrees with me. That car is violating regulations and it's getting towed." I shook my head. "Karen, you really don't know when to quit." She smiled smugly. "You'll learn to respect the HOA eventually." Just then, the unmistakable rumble of a tow truck pulling onto the street made my stomach drop. Karen's grin widened. Ah, perfect timing. I turned toward the truck as the driver hopped out, clipboard in hand. "Which vehicle?" he asked. Karen pointed dramatically at the black sedan. "That one. Remove it immediately." The driver walked up to me first. "You the owner?" I shook my head. "No. It belongs to my wife." Karen snorted. "Oh, and where is she? Because unless she moves it now, it's gone." I smirked. "She's at work. But I wouldn't touch that car if I were you." Karen laughed, her voice dripping with condescension. "Oh, really? And why is that?" I leaned in slightly. "Because my wife's an undercover cop, and that's an unmarked police vehicle." Karen's smug expression froze in place. For the first time in all my years dealing with Karen, she looked genuinely speechless. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, as if trying to find a way to spin this in her favor. But there was no escaping the reality. She had just walked into a trap. The tow truck driver arched an eyebrow. "Wait, did you just say this is a police vehicle?" I nodded, keeping my gaze fixed on Karen. "Yep, an unmarked government-issued vehicle." Karen's face drained of all color. She started blinking rapidly, her fingers twitching around her laminated rulebook as if she could somehow flip to a page that would save her. That doesn't make any sense," she finally spat out. "There are no police in this neighborhood. That car shouldn't be here." I laughed, shaking my head. "Karen, you don't get to decide where undercover officers live. And for the record, my wife's been living here longer than you." Karen let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh. "This is a misunderstanding. I didn't know." The tow truck driver didn't seem convinced. He crossed his arms. "So, let me get this straight. You called me out here to tow a legally parked police vehicle?" Karen's mouth flapped uselessly. I sighed. "Yeah, Looks like you just tried to have an active duty officer's car illegally impounded." At that moment, Karen turned a ghastly shade of white. As if the universe wanted to seal her fate, another vehicle pulled into the driveway. My wife had come home. She stepped out of her personal car, sunglasses still on, her usual composed expression quickly morphing into confusion as she took in the scene. A tow truck parked at the curb, Karen looking like she'd seen a ghost, and me standing there, thoroughly enjoying the moment. "What's going on?" she asked, walking up beside me. Before I could answer, Karen, now in full-blown panic mode, threw up her hands. "Officer, I swear, this was a mistake. I was just following HOA protocol." My wife frowned. "HOA protocol?" She glanced at me. I grinned. "Karen here called a tow truck for your car, apparently thinking it was a commercial vehicle." Karen let out a wheezing laugh, desperately trying to backpedal. I didn't know it was yours. I was just doing my job as HOA president." My wife arched an eyebrow. "So your job is to illegally tow private property?" Her tone was calm, but I could tell she was pissed. Karen stammered, "It was just a misunderstanding." The tow truck driver shook his head. "Lady, you just wasted my time. You owe me a call-out fee." Karen's eyes bulged. "What? I'm not paying for this." He shrugged. "Not my problem. You requested a tow, now you gotta pay." Karen looked like she was about to faint. I leaned against the car, enjoying every second of this. "So, Karen, how's that HOA authority working out for you now?" Karen's face twisted in rage. She looked from the tow truck driver to my wife, then back to me, as if searching for a way out of this disaster. But there wasn't one. I shouldn't have to pay for this," she shrieked, gripping her clipboard like it was some sort of legal shield. "This isn't fair. I was enforcing HOA policy." My wife crossed her arms, her badge now visible on her hip. "Karen, let me explain something to you," she said in the measured, authoritative tone she used when dealing with uncooperative suspects. "What you did wasn't just petty, it was illegal. You tried to have a police vehicle towed without cause. That could easily be seen as obstruction." Karen's mouth flapped open. "Obstruction? I didn't—" The tow truck driver let out an exaggerated sigh, flipping through his paperwork. "Look, lady, I don't care what kind of neighborhood drama you've got going on. Bottom line is, you owe me a call-out fee." Karen's face flushed, beet red. "I am not paying for this. I demand the HOA cover this cost." The driver scoffed. "Yeah, good luck with that." By now, a small crowd of neighbors had gathered, drawn by the commotion. They whispered amongst themselves, their faces ranging from amused to outright delighted. "Looks like Karen's finally getting a taste of her own medicine," Mrs. Henderson murmured, smirking. "About time," another neighbor added. "She fined me $200 for leaving my garbage can out for an extra 30 minutes last month. Maybe now she'll learn what it's like to be on the other end of it." Karen, realizing she was losing control of the situation, tried one last desperate move. This is harassment," she screeched, turning toward the crowd. "I have done nothing wrong. I was simply enforcing neighborhood regulations, and now I am being publicly humiliated." The neighbors weren't buying it. In fact, a few of them started laughing. "You mean, like, how you publicly humiliated the Johnsons by sending violation letters for their overgrown lawn when their son was in the hospital," someone called out. "Or when you tried to evict the Martins for putting up string lights last Christmas." Karen's face contorted in fury. "That was different. I was protecting our property values." My wife sighed. "Karen, stop. You're embarrassing yourself." Then things went from bad to worse for her. One of the officers on patrol happened to be driving by when he spotted the commotion. He pulled up, stepping out of his cruiser with a look of mild exasperation. "What's going on here?" he asked, scanning the scene. The tow truck driver gestured at Karen. "This lady called me to tow a police vehicle. Then she refused to pay the call-out fee." Karen immediately went into damage control mode. "Officer, this is just a misunderstanding. I was simply enforcing our community standards when I—" The officer held up a hand, cutting her off. "Wait, you called a tow truck for an unmarked police vehicle?" Karen's eye twitched. I didn't know it was police issued. How was I supposed to know? It didn't have any markings." The officer pinched the bridge of his nose. "You didn't think to check before ordering a tow?" Karen let out a frustrated squeak. "The rules clearly state—" The officer turned to my wife. "Ma'am, is this your vehicle?" She nodded. "Yes, and I'd like to formally report an attempted unlawful towing and harassment." Karen visibly panicked. "No, no, 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 please, there's no need for that. We can handle this internally." The officer pulled out his notepad. "Sorry, but I've got to file a report. Interfering with police property is a serious offense." Karen looked like she was going to be sick as the officer began writing up the incident. The tow truck driver lost patience. "All right, that's it," he grumbled. "I'm done waiting." He turned to Karen. "Either you pay me my fee, or I'm filing in small claims." "What's it going to be?" Karen's expression twisted in rage. She looked at the crowd, at the officer, at my wife, then finally at me. I raised an eyebrow. "Well, Karen?" For a moment I thought she might explode on the spot. Then, with a growl of pure humiliation, she dug into her purse and yanked out her credit card, practically throwing it at the tow truck driver. He swiped it. "Thanks for your business." Karen snatched her card back, looking like she was about to burst into flames. By the time the officer finished taking statements, Karen had lost every last shred of dignity she had left. She stormed away from my driveway, avoiding eye contact with anyone. But as she reached the sidewalk, she turned back, her face twisted in venomous hatred. "You'll regret this," she hissed. I grinned. "Oh, Karen, I already don't." The crowd burst into laughter as Karen stomped away toward her house, defeated. For the first time in years, I felt like I had finally won. But Karen wasn't done. Not yet. That night, I saw her pacing her porch, talking frantically on her phone. I had a gut feeling she wasn't just venting. She was plotting something. My wife noticed too. "We should keep an eye on her," she said, her tone serious. Sure enough, the very next morning, a new HOA letter arrived in my mailbox, a notice of formal violation. I opened it and smirked. Karen was trying to retaliate, but what she didn't know was that I had one last surprise for her. The moment I saw Karen's latest desperate attempt at retaliation, I couldn't help but laugh. The letter was a formal violation notice citing an unauthorized commercial vehicle parked in my driveway, the same vehicle Karen had already been publicly humiliated for trying to tow. She was doubling down. "Wow," I muttered, holding up the letter for my wife to see. "She really doesn't know when to quit." My wife scanned the notice, then let out a dry chuckle. She must really enjoy losing. Karen had tried every trick in the book to get back at me. Within days, I started receiving back-to-back violation notices. First, it was for my car. Then, suddenly, my grass was 0.5 inches too tall. A day later, I was cited for an unauthorized porch decoration, which was literally just a wreath my wife had hung up for the fall season. It was comical. "She's throwing everything at the wall, hoping something sticks," my wife said, watching as I added the newest violation letter to the growing pile of nonsense on our kitchen counter. "She's desperate," I agreed, "but she just made a huge mistake." What Karen had apparently forgotten was that her actions were being watched by the city. Now she had just handed me the last piece of evidence I needed to bury her. I gathered every single violation letter she had sent me, along with copies of my legal parking exemption from the city and a report detailing her previous attempt to tow an unmarked police vehicle. Then, I sent the whole package directly to the city's legal department. Within 24 hours, I got a response, and the news was even better than I expected. 2 days later, Karen's reign officially ended. City officials showed up in person to inform her that the HOA had violated multiple housing codes and abuse statutes. Not only was her harassment of homeowners illegal, but her attempt to enforce rules that didn't exist had put the entire HOA under official investigation. The result? Karen was removed from her position immediately, banned from ever holding another leadership role in any HOA again. And the final nail in the coffin? The city slapped massive fines on her for abuse of power, fraudulent reporting, and harassment. By the time the news spread, the entire neighborhood celebrated. Neighbors cheered. Some brought out champagne. Someone even blasted music from their front yard, a clear middle finger to the noise complaints Karen had spent years issuing. Karen, meanwhile, was nowhere to be seen. But it wasn't over yet. Days after her removal, Karen was hit with more bad news. The city wasn't just fining her. They were filing criminal charges. Apparently, her fraudulent fines and misuse of HOA funds went deeper than anyone realized. A full audit revealed that she had been embezzling money for years, funneling HOA fees into a personal slush fund. It wasn't long before she was served official court documents. I happened to be outside when the officers arrived at her door. Karen opened it, still dressed in her usual pastel cardigan and pearls, but her face was pale as a ghost. I watched as they handed her the papers, her hands shaking. This can't be happening," she stammered. The officer's tone was firm. "You're being investigated for fraud, embezzlement, and financial misconduct. You have the right to seek legal counsel." Karen staggered back into her house, slamming the door shut. I couldn't stop grinning. A few weeks later, Karen was officially charged. Court documents detailed how she had skimmed thousands from the HOA over the years, billing fake expenses, pocketing the money, and even falsifying maintenance reports to justify her theft. The court froze her assets, seized her bank accounts, and barred her from owning property in any HOA-run community. Again, the neighborhood was absolutely thrilled. At the next community meeting, we voted unanimously to disband the HOA altogether. Karen's once mighty reign was officially erased from existence. The day Karen was sentenced was the final victory. She stood before the judge, her once perfectly curated image shattered. The judge handed down a 3-year prison sentence for fraud and abuse of power, along with a permanent ban from holding any administrative position in any neighborhood association. When they led her out of the courtroom in cuffs, she refused to look at anyone. I watched from the back, arms crossed, feeling a deep, satisfied sense of closure. Karen had ruled this neighborhood with an iron fist for years, but in the end, she lost everything. A month later, the neighborhood was completely transformed. Without Karen's oppressive rules, people actually enjoyed living here again. Front yards were decorated however people pleased, children rode their bikes without fear of excessive noise violations, and no one had to worry about petty fines. One evening, as I sat on my porch with my wife, watching the sunset, I felt something I hadn't in years. Peace. Karen was gone. The HOA was dissolved, and the neighborhood was finally free.